Bonsoir. Alors, chaud, on a passé une journée.
Hello everyone, thank you. We've had a fascinating presentations and I'm going to finish the day with several ideas we've had, in fact, because we've had some discussions with some of you on this paradigm that is being seen in Africa and also emerging countries, which means that maybe the history is changing. I think it's important to keep that in mind. Why? Because what you have just seen, the various projects that have been presented, it's not only projects that are adds-on, minor adds-on that are just here to improve things. Maybe it's a fundamental trend. That means that it's going to change things in Africa, see Africa differently. We've said that, but maybe this way of thinking, more agile, different ways, it could also have an impact on the short term. So maybe the question is, will we in fact change? We are post COP21 and also post-industrial areas. So the way things are happening, the ways that the social interactions, things no longer the same. And I think that's the spirit behind this conference, trying to see what are the trends, underlying trends. So basically, I'm going to try to sum up what I feel is changing. I think that there are three essential dynamics to this kind of, let me give you just a couple of examples. The first one, and I'm sure you've heard of that, is the Moore Law. This law was first named in 1971 by an engineer, or 1969, this engineer has said that every 2 years the power of microprocessors is going to double. And it's true. This law has proven to be true. You can see that the power, the calculation power of these microprocessors have multiplied and the price have gone down. So this is a picture of a first computer connected to internet in 1976, and it will have cost you $1 million. But less than 4 years later, the price was slashed by 10, and 10 years later, this is what we call micro IT computers. And it was the beginning. It was the beginning when internet started, in fact, going to your houses and also in companies. Now, 10 years later, another breakthrough, we speak of mobility, nomad computer. So for 1,000 euros, you could have your own laptop. And this is when we have a boom in the internet users. Now, in 2000, we had about 200,000 people, or million people connected to internet. And then, 10 years later, not only did the cost was reduced, but also the size of that. Here you have a smartphone, which is extremely powerful. And this is what we call a revolution. Why? Because the power of a smartphone is higher than all the computers that were brought to the moon. And look at the price, a very low price, and everything is connected. And I think we're starting in 2010 to talk about what we call futurist notions. Look at 2016. Here you have a smartphone that is right here. It was launched in India 2 weeks ago, and you have to pay $3 to get it. What does it mean? It means that all the people around the planet, even those who don't earn more than $1 a day, could potentially be connected with this phone. And you can imagine the consequences. We've had over 200,000 phones like this sold, and the objective is to sell over 2 million phones like this. That's in India, but also elsewhere around the world. And what you have to understand is when you start doing these kinds of things, you're what we call gaining or creating opportunities. The idea is to have connection together. Everybody, in fact, could be connected. It's what we call social inclusion, health inclusion also at a very large scale. So gains of opportunities, it's very simple. Imagine you are a farmer, you start harvesting. If you don't have the information, you're going to destroy or have what we call a drop in, because you're going to sell this on a local market, and you'll have what we call a distortion between the reality and the sell. You might have too much supply offering, difficult to in fact match both, and then the prices are going to go up and down, and so therefore you're destroying this information. Now if you have a mobile phone, all you need to do is send 3 text messages, make a phone call, and you're capable of making the right decision in terms of prices, so the prices will be optimal. So just, I would say, looking at the supply and demand. So it's a great way of harmonizing both. And this could also be applied in social situations. If you give, in fact, a phone in Africa, you could, in fact, create better health care because the information is available, even if you don't have an additional doctor in the village. So statistics show that this is true. When you have access to internet, you have better education. So all this, of course, do express what I call opportunity. So a mobile phone, even if it's basic, how about the smartphone, where you have IP connection? It could be very smart, and so this entire dynamic is a contributor. This means what? In Africa, in 2015, the GDP was 5.5, and as you know, that into 2015 there was also a deflation in commodities. So we can say that the main driver, the propeller of this growth, what we thought would be commodities, were not really the case. Countries who do not have these commodities have still experienced strong growth in the years, even if you had a deflation. Kenya, Rwanda, Ivory Coast, okay, you have farming products, but still these countries were always countries that had were influenced by the prices of commodities. And maybe in deflation there's another factor. So we say and we talk about the GDP. What is it? It's the mobile GDP. So, for example, if I look at the GDP per inhabitant, and here I have the statistics since 1960, but anyhow, since 1960, what do we see? The revenues per inhabitant in Africa has dropped. In 40 years, the revenue has dropped. Okay, that was a big problem for the continent, but interestingly, at a given time, during this whole time, the mobile phone growth is very stable. So the number of mobile phones per inhabitant is very stable and quite constant, not growing at any time. But look at 2005, here you have the mobile phone advent, and we showed this. So we have over 80%. So 73% of the people have a mobile phone, so which is extraordinary. And what do we see? We see that thanks to that, you also have a growth of the GDP per inhabitant. So we can say that it's correlated to the mobile phone, but not to inflation. So it's quite interesting because when we think about growth, we can see that here the GDP has tripled per inhabitant when the scale of time is about 30 years. So it's a strong message, and again, it is correlated to information dissemination. And so we see that 3 exceptions. Every time we have a telecom in Africa, we can see the growth of this country picking up, and this growth, unlike the other commodities growth, this is not just 3 people who are going to be there. It's a wave that that takes on more people, better distributed. So this pickup is in fact correlated to the emergence of smartphones. Today, this trend is exploding. I think that as I'm speaking, we have about 67% of penetration. They're not all connected to IP, but gradually this is the case, and you can see the correlation with the growth is extremely strong. Now another example, and I think that a lot of you have seen this, M-Pesa. M-Pesa. Some do not like it, but it's interesting, the data of M-Pesa. M-Pesa is what 50% of the population of a country that has access to banking. In Kenya, you have 45 million inhabitants, or 23 million is with M-Pesa. But the amounts of transactions through M-Pesa is the equivalent of the entire country's GDP. The World Bank says what? That in Kenya last year there was about 9.5%. 30% of that growth comes from M-Pesa. So this is a clear example, very clear example of this potential that only one app then given out to throughout the country, this digital penetration that M-Pesa made possible. So this is a macroeconomic growth. On the one hand, you had informal economy, money that was hidden somewhere home, now is there, and it's also visible with central banking, and so the central bank has more assets to, in fact, put in a guarantee, and then could in fact borrow at lower interest rates, and then could in fact lend to the population. Now the economy part, when you have available money, it's easier to circulate. If you want to take part in, for example, the working capital of your uncle's company, you have to go and drive and give the money. Now with e-money you can do that, and you speed up, I would say, the activity. And so this is something that is seen in more or less every sector, and I think that this is a huge driver for African growth. All the more true since you don't have a lot of infrastructure, so you create more opportunities, gains of opportunities. So number two, and it's fundamental, you've got to understand it, is what we call training, education. We talked about MOOCs, this kind of acronym that is a bit complicated, the online courses, but this is a reality that has even more impact in Africa. But what you have to understand through this slide, Sebastian Thrun is a professor in intelligence, so he's in Stanford. What's going to happen? So he's giving a class to 100 people, and one day he is awarded the DARPA award, the most prestigious award, so having a full autonomy to the robot. So as he is a professor, intelligence, artificial intelligence, with his students, he wins this prize, a prize that is given by the U.S. Army. He said, well, I'm fed up being a teacher, I'm fed up being in a class only to the elite. I want to make this discipline available to everyone because it's essential. And he's going to be the one launching the very first MOOCs. I'm not going to go into the details of the story, but of course, it's quite impressive, this story. What I'm telling you is the consequence, the effect of this MOOC. So after this MOOC, the MOOC that is longest, 7 months of classes, he said, okay, I have 155,000, I have 24,000 who followed the entire MOOC. So 100 students, 120 students, and now 140 or 70,000. So you could understand that you are experiencing an exceptional moment. It's like the inventing, in fact, the printed press by Gutenberg. When you're capable of massifying knowledge, sharing of knowledge, and no longer making it local. So you're no longer in the classes of Stanford or Harvard or at Normal Sup in Paris. You are now global, massified. So this is an exceptional moment in human life, and this massification of knowledge. What has Sebastian Trun showed that from every country in the planet, he had a student in Somalia, so at least one student from every country on the planet who registered on these online classes. And I think that's very important because it goes to show that one of the entry barrier, how in fact you cannot be included, how no knowledge is no longer in fact segmented. But the consequence of that, imagine Mohamed Bashir Sheikh, who's a refugee in the Dadaab camp, the biggest refugee camp in the north of Kenya. You have 500,000 refugees who have been living in this camp. And of course, lots of, unfortunately, they have access to internet. You know that these are so they have a certain number of computers, they have free access for those, and so this young man decided to, well, he was able to learn English, written, spoken, and then he started learning about computer coding, and well enough to, in fact, create a service-providing company on platforms or e-lance, for example. And he also said, and then he started earning a living quite well, and then training other people in the camp, and had 1, 2, 3, or 4, 5 programmers who started learning about coding and also selling their services. It's a wonderful success story, and so today he is the ambassador for UNESCO and traveling around the world to explain exactly what I just said. I think it's a great momentum. It has an essential potential. It means that you have to think and rethink the protocols, educational protocols or contents, but it's a way of breaking the walls, and also you don't need to train in Western countries or in top universities and then going to work for the government and never seen that. I think that now this dynamic, we're definitely changing it, and we've seen that with the MOOCs and other examples. And then third dynamics, maybe a bit more complicated to understand, but important, is what we call the tech labs, the Fab labs. We know that technologies are key barriers to develop countries or zones. It is definitely a big barrier, which means that Westerners, developed countries, are capable of keeping these experts rather than go and being able to learn how to fish. And this is what we had to do in the former centuries. And what we talk a lot about today is what we call these open sources technologies. These techniques now we can disseminate, but also building them and making them much more effective than the owners. One example, Linux, I'm sure you've heard of that. You know that it's everywhere on your mobile phone, whether it's iOS, any kind of technologies. At the heart of that, at the center of that, you have a little Linux part, and that was developed by 100,000 developers in the world, and so they took part, contributed to this knowledge, which is the best of the best, you know. So even if there is a fault detected in Linux, we could repair it in 24 times because it's an open source, so that means you have a coder working anywhere on the planet could solve the problem with this patch and I would say fill in the gap. And so this dynamic is applied pretty much everywhere. The software world, but also hardware You can see it also in biotechs and also everywhere. So these three notions, the networking, distribution of network, of knowledge, disseminating also in the techniques, definitely changes the paradigm of developing countries. And I don't think we'll go backwards anymore, see things in the same way, because of course these are definitely areas where you have emergence, skills, and so on. And I think that we are now switching to a world of incremental. Here you have a picture of a researcher, white blouse. Now we have the world of innovator, disruptive innovation. You can innovate anywhere. And thanks to internet, you can combine two concepts and being able to create disruptive innovation. So this young man is from Sierra Leone. He's 14 years old. He's going to invent different techniques to recharge the batteries, distribute your energy. And today, at 16 years old, he is a researcher. Now he's in the United States. He's in the MIT technology. He got a special grant because, of course, he's so talented that they wanted to have him there. Now, this would have been impossible only 5 years ago. But thanks to the knowledge that he got from internet, thanks to the fact that he was able to, I would say, merge to one knowledge and then get a little bit from here or that and build this little product that he's showing on the picture, a bee-man lion generator. So now he is part of this disruptive innovators, this open source. And don't forget that this is an essential point that is definitely changing the picture, the overall picture. Now the question is how we can make it broader. But maybe there's another question. What happens in Western countries? For example, the war of energy, is it going to be mean centralized power plants, or we're going to use what we call digital generators, or on models that are much more agile? Maybe in agriculture, should we use what we call intense agriculture based on chemistry, energies, entrance, or systems that are infrared sensors that is capable of showing and seeing and using 80% less water, having an agriculture that is, in other words, much more effective, much healthier. Or if we have to have systems of medicines that are based on extremely costly equipment, or if we have to use other types of equipments that are available with open source innovation, disruptive innovation, and exactly what I've talked about. I know that this word, this initiator of the project EcoPen, is taking shape. And so EcoPen, the objective is to have a $150 ultrasound, whereas normally it's invoiced as $15,000. So this is a great example of disruptive innovation. This is not a crazy fad. This is something that is happening. The dynamic is definitely here, and it's going to move and shake things. So let me just sum up what African innovation is. A bit neglected up until today, because I think that this innovation could, just like the Toyota principle, or in Korea, this kind of innovation can represent an innovation that will blossom in Africa, but also pave the way for other countries. What we need is to have distributed models, what we call consensus models that we find. So these models, we see that in the African village, if in different startups, the best startups in, I would say, California, what we call agile models. So this dynamic that is extremely powerful. Why? Because it conveys the different notions. So the world is in fact changing, so either we continue to have raw material commodities, so we have 4 degrees extra temperature, so it's a catastrophe, or we rethink the world of opportunities, what we call frugal, intelligent, smart, and I think that this dynamic is the dynamic of the 21st century. And then we have disruptive innovation, and this is a dynamic that is also essential. We need to see that, and we see it in various areas. So, in fact, this notion of knowledge or know-how is not just one part of, it's more of distributing this completely open. So these 4 notions are pillars, in fact, for the world of the future. So these notions are going to definitely be seen in emerging countries. No big surprise when you see that these innovations from Africa are also coming. I'm thinking of M-Pesa, or even Orange. Now, these were invented in Africa, and we see that also happening in Europe. And so this dynamic is going to be broader. Why? And it makes sense. It makes sense because it appears in emerging. So we can see that in transportation, in health, in energy, in education, and also agriculture and farming. We need to create these new models. These models are today something that is possible. This is what I wanted to share with you, this notion that I wanted you to think about, and to, as a way of conclusion, say, yes, we've seen extraordinary things in the area of health, but we've also seen the world, the 21st century, that is now coming. And this is a huge challenge, and this is where I want to focus in the years to come. I co-founded African Fundec with my colleague here, and the idea is to set up schools, training systems that are based on these 4 notions. And what we're very convinced about is that these notions are really important, and if we're capable of implementing small-size systems in these territories, we can make sure that these countries are happy countries where innovation, transformation is happening, and maybe places will be the future places. Thank you for your attention.